Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the TTE Podcast. And today I've got three special guests. And I think today what we're going to do is run what I like to call the four-corner offense, because there's a few items I really want to get to, some hot topics from a sports perspective. So I have gathered together a collection of gentlemen who know sports inside and out, aren't afraid to share their opinions, and really don't care what you think at all. So to introduce everybody, Pat Redmond, Alan Miser, Brian Tubbs, how you guys doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm good, Dennis. Thanks for having me. And I've never been described so perfectly as what you just said. Just freeze that moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually replay that tomorrow. Just hit it over and over again. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me as well to this wonderful show.
Probably in the podcast now because it's all downhill from here.
Yeah,
so
that's for sure.
We'll just jump right into it. So there's some things that have been on my mind that I want to kind of talk through, and I think back to all of the hundreds of happy hours and the college basketball drafts that we've had, which is a unique thing to us. So for those that don't know, we draft college basketball players like it's fantasy basketball, but that's another conversation for another day. But there's a number of things I want to get to, and the first thing I really want to talk about is I'm just going to open it up to anybody that wants to start, but I want to talk about what's your take on the impact that COVID has had on sports. And I say this because while we're recording this, I'm watching the Cardinals at the Seahawks, and it looks like football, and it sort of feels like football when they pump the sound in. But when they pan towards the seats and the whole thing's empty, it's still – I know that there's a whole lot of dynamics in play, and I know it doesn't feel right, but to see it visually after all of this time is still really stunning. And I just want to kind of get your thoughts on what do you think about COVID's impact on sports at large?
So Dennis, you made the mistake of including me. I'm not afraid to start. I'll start on this one. I'm living it on. I'm living it on a lot of levels, right? I thought the bubble NBA was ridiculously entertaining. I felt like the officiating was very different than our normal NBA regular season, and it really opened the game up. And I thought it was a ton of fun. It's weird not seeing people there. I think you feel that most in college football. There are probably some games that we've all watched where, like, you know what? If this were your normal Saturday night and those seats were rocking, that play would have been enough to maybe make a 7-point swing in this game. And then I'm feeling it on the lower level because, my oldest daughter is a basketball player, and we're kind of trying to do this travel basketball thing. And, it's tough as a human being and a parent to balance out. I don't want my daughter falling behind, and I want her playing this game that she loves, but how responsible am I being if I take her to a basketball game in, say, New Albany or Big Walnut or something like that? So I know most of our focus is probably going to be on the national scene, and we can stay there for the most part. But it's also really interesting the impact it's had locally and on youth sports as parents try to figure out what's the best thing to do.
No, exactly. And I don't think we have to stay on a national level at all. I think that's a perspective that I don't think a lot of people either considering or the ones that are certainly can identify with what you're saying. It's just I think about something you said. Watching Ohio State play at Penn State was probably the most shocking thing to my system because for my money, that's the hardest place in college football to play. That place at night when it's pumping, and to see it so empty, like you can't tell me that Penn State wouldn't have been closer in that game if the crowd was there. Like there's just no way you can convince me of that. So, but Pat, Brian, what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Pat.
I think fans are assholes for the most part. So, I guess, I think the NBA did a great job. Obviously, with the bubble was good. I don't mind the crowd pumping in noise. I thought baseball really fucked up everything. They had an opportunity to get something hammered out earlier in the spring, late spring, early summer, where they could have played what would have felt like a normal season, 120 games, 130 games, something like that. And, they couldn't get out of their own way. So we got this sham of a season, and that kind of pissed me off because I'm a baseball guy. So, I wasn't too happy with that. And I'm also a Reds fan, and, we barely got in the playoffs, and then it was shitty. So for me, but yeah, to the local point that Alan was making, over the summer, there's a little disappointment here on my personal part, but, my daughter likes softball. She wanted to get in this girls' softball league, and they canceled the whole thing. We had started it early in February, signed her up. She was going to start in March, and then if all this stuff went down. But then I hear all my guy friends who have sons, well, all summer long, they're playing their fucking baseball games, but for some reason the girls can't get on the field. So that pissed me off. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just telling you. We were talking local stuff. That was top of my mind. I was really pissed about that. I was like, oh, it's okay for the boys to go out and play their game during COVID, but they can't organize the girls softball league. I don't know. They're just kind of shitty. But overall, I think that everyone's done a good job. How's that? Is that
that's
hashtag girl dad.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Patrick, I would throw in there, you talked about baseball a little bit, and I think the other thing we saw, regardless of how we felt about how they did things, was that, the pitchers need spring training. They need reps. They need those mound days, and when they didn't get them and they started dropping like flies, it just it was a struggle. And, the other thing I'll add, that's the other frustration with this local stuff is, one of the reasons why getting my daughters to bed tonight was a struggle because they were exhausted all day. Because the only way we can get gym time is to have our practice from 9 to 10 at night on a Wednesday night, and they had to be in the classroom today. So, this whole situation has really impacted, because, in a normal situation, you're on the travel team, you just practice at the high school or middle school at 6 o'clock and everybody's happy. But now we're fighting for places at Sports Ohio and places like that to try to get gym time, and it's really tough.
No, that makes sense. Brian, what do you think?
No, and to you guys' point, in terms of the local level stuff, my son was thinking about trying out for the basketball team, 7th grade, and so we kind of talked about, kind of just different things that he wanted to do, and then he said his friend had told him that I guess he had already made the basketball team, and we completely missed it, and apparently there was an email that was sent basically saying that you had to sign up through the coach, and because they're only allowed a certain number of people in the gym at one time. I think it was only 20 kids in the gym per tryout, so they had to spread it out over I guess a couple days. But that's just, I don't want to say that's the new normal, but it's just weird. 'Cause when we were all growing up, you go out for the basketball team, there's no telling, there's no number of kids in the gym. It's just everybody in the gym. In terms of fans, I do miss fans at it. I will agree with you guys. I do think that the NBA bubble was fun to watch. One thing I did think about though is when Clemson lost to Notre Dame, and those fans rushed the field.
Holy COVID, Batman.
You should. What's that now?
I said, holy COVID, Batman.
Yeah. So I was sitting there and I'm looking at that's what you should do when you beat the number one team in the country. But do you do that in these times and the ramifications of that? And I don't want to say it was the parent in me, but is anybody thinking about how y'all just spreading COVID amongst each other? And what if the quarterback, Ian Book, gets COVID because y'all are out here storming the field? there are repercussions potentially to this that are down the line. But yeah, in the moment it feels great, and you might feel some sense of normal. But
And just
Well, I'll say this, Brian. I'll say this, Brian. Where did they rush the field at? What state was that in again? Indiana? Was that Indiana?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there you go. A bunch of dipshits live there. I mean, basically, Indiana is a southern state. It really is. It just happens to be right next to Chicago and in between, Ohio.
I believe.
Sorry, go ahead.
The other thing that
Flyover country. There it is.
the other thing I'll add to that, Brian, and we don't need to go down this rabbit hole because I think it's fairly well documented. But it was a statement to me of the Bob Dylan song, the times they are changing. Well, the times have changed because all four of us can remember a time where there was no win that would warrant Notre Dame fans storming the field.
That's the
Not
part
one.
I want to talk about right there. When you brought up Notre Dame, it's more of a crime that they even stormed the field as Notre Dame than it is that COVID was going on. You don't do that if you're Notre Dame.
Unless you realize that you're not Notre Dame anymore.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Well, the Notre Dame that we grew up with, that's a whole different. That's a whole different
That
animal.
name's gone. Yeah, that name's gone.
It's been gone 20 years. I mean,
but I will
we
say,
haven't seen Notre Dame be Notre Dame.
I think this version of Notre Dame, with Brian Kelly in the last, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever, I think they've hit their ceiling. I think Notre Dame now is about as good as it's ever going to be because, honestly, if you're not recruiting at the same level as Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, if you're not recruiting on that level, you virtually have no chance unless they beat themselves. Like, everybody's playing for a fourth playoff spot and a nice bowl game on New Year's Day at this point. If you're not recruiting at that level, you just don't have a chance. And I think Notre Dame hit their ceiling.
Yeah, college football is a different game. Having a quarterback that can complete downfield passes of more than 12 yards is a huge advantage in college football. And Notre Dame has a quarterback that can do that. Once he graduates, they're gonna go back to what we've seen. The other eye-opening thing of that game too was with as well as Book played and the type of season Notre Dame's having. To your point, Dennis, about the talent level of Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. I mean, Clemson loses the number 1 pick in the freaking NFL draft, plugs in a freshman, and he's coming out and he's throwing for 350 yards a night. It's just
nuts.
It's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I remember having this thought the year Michigan State won the Big Ten, made the playoff, and then they played Alabama in the semifinal and got destroyed. And I just remember thinking, here's Michigan State, a bunch of 2- and 3-star kids and maybe some 4-star kids that got coached up into 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. And they're playing against a bunch of guys who were all 4 and 5 stars coming out of high school. Like, the level of talent just wasn't equal. And so, again, if you're not recruiting on that level, like, it's just going to be really, really hard to compete with that. Although it's interesting because that kid from Clemson only played because Trevor Lawrence got coached.
Right. And then all those kids spread it there during that game.
Yeah.
That's the irony.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see, like the Raiders had that issue where it seemed like half the team had it, and the NFL was just like, hey, tough luck. You guys didn't do what you're supposed to do. You're going to play with 3 offensive linemen. Good luck. Like the impact on all of this has been so, far and wide. Like, even from, an NBA perspective, they did not want to start until, MLK Day. But if they did, they were going to forfeit something like $700 million. So they had to agree to start 3 days before Christmas because who's going to walk away from $750 million?
Well, certainly not rich white guys.
And I think that's the other thing about it too is that COVID. I mean, we all knew that a lot of this is money driven, but COVID has really made it money driven because when the Big Ten canceled football, they did it thinking this is what's in the best interest of safety. But, now you're talking, Nebraska was talking about a shortfall of like $80 million to the athletic department. So yeah, hell yeah, they want to play. And then you just extrapolate that over like all these other universities and everything. I know you guys mentioned baseball as well, but there's all these other places and you're just like, you know what? The money's too great for people to turn it away. Safety be damned in some instances.
But if it's too great to turn away, don't tell me that they're amateurs.
Oh yeah, that's a whole different discussion for a different day. That's all. Yeah, but I agree with you.
We'll table that because I want to talk about that in depth in another episode. But one of the other things that I think that COVID certainly had an impact on is voting and social upheaval and everything. And one of the things I do kind of want to talk to you guys about and get your perspective on is what impact do you think athletes had on the election, specifically with athletes doing all these commercials and starting these campaigns and organizations about getting out the vote? Like, do you feel like athletes had an impact in motivating people to go out and vote this year in this year's election?
Well, I think it did a little bit. I think to a degree, I'm usually skeptical of celebrity endorsements. Just in general, like if Kim Kardashian thinks it's a good idea for you to vote for Joe Biden, well, that's great, but like Kim Kardashian shouldn't be deciding who you vote for. You should vote based on what is germane to you. But I do think there is something to be said about people who have a microphone or who have a platform, if you will. And I think they might have influenced some younger people, but in terms of older people, I would be skeptical in terms of who they might have influenced. But I do think that they probably did influence some, for sure.
Yeah, Brian, I tend to agree. I think that especially, some, and I can't put myself in the shoes and minds of everyone, but my assumption would be that in some of these sports, a lot of these players come from pretty modest means, and it probably does mean something to the normal population, people who are growing up in these same neighborhoods that some of these athletes came from. It probably means something that they put their voice behind those folks. One would assume that their voices would have been behind them as well, but hey, maybe it was just that little extra to say, you know what, yeah, screw it, I'll wait in line for an hour and a half to do this instead of just going and doing something else.
I just feel like while it's important to go vote and exercise your civic duty and let your voice be heard and all that, my gut just kept telling me that any athlete that was telling you to go vote was secretly telling you to vote Democrat. Like, it was subliminal in my mind.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was just more of a gut feeling. Like, it was almost like coded language. Like, yes, you need to vote, but we all know who you need to vote for.
Well, and Dennis, part of that too just comes from the social fabric, right? Because when and whether it's complete, I'm not going to dive into a doctorate thesis on political science right now, but when you've got the headlines telling you that one party is putting active measures in place to give you more hoops to jump through before you can cast your vote, and then you've got a group of celebrities, more so in this athletes, encouraging you to vote, you can read that landscape and understand who they're asking you to vote for, and you've probably already got an instinct of who you should vote for because I've got my issues with all of our political parties, but it's clear that one is placing a premium on the idea of limiting the amount of votes that are cast and counted. And so, those types of things make it pretty, along with the athlete message, I think it was a big push to vote Democrat. The downside of that, and I think this is what you're getting at, is, okay, getting rid of Trump and voting against, some of these other things is fine. But what's the next step in terms of holding people accountable and really making sure that we're voting for people who are driving change in our best interest? And this wasn't that. This was more of a get out and vote, and to your point, vote Democrat. That's the next level, and I'll be curious to see what the appetite is amongst public figures to do that.
Well, they don't want you to vote. I mean, they've said it. You can go back and what was that video that was circulating? Some dude at some some gathering in the 70s or 80s at some political. I don't remember what it was, but the guy was basically like, "We don't want everybody to vote. If everybody votes, then people are going to vote us out." So yeah, I mean, it's totally part of their agenda to suppress that. And I think that a lot of people, I'm on the fence about whether or not athletes had any impact on it. I think it probably worked both ways, unintentionally. I think there's a lot of people out there that don't like athletes, particularly people of color, that are out there talking about their president and all this shit. And I think it probably drove some of them to go vote. I think it worked both ways, unfortunately. But look, we're here. This is where we're at. I don't know if we got a Biden in yet. I guess we'll figure that out at some point.
I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to say, I Googled it. The guy's name was Paul Weyrich, and he was the father of the conservative movement. You can Google that, listener. Google that guy.
I've seen that video from the 70s.
Yeah.
He's basically like, listen,
yeah.
If we let everybody vote, there is absolutely no chance we can win. I've seen that.
There is no conservative party if everybody votes. Most people aren't like that. It's just that the people that are, like me, who are kind of like, it's all bullshit. I only go out and vote because, my wife makes me, one, now, but two, because the guy that was in was a fucking madman. So we had to do something about that. Anyway, I'll listen. I have enough beers into this podcast that I will derail this whole fucking thing. So.
Well, no. The only thing I was going to add to it was that certainly, at least when I was growing up, and maybe you guys was it too. Like a lot of athletes, at least from what I can remember, weren't all that political. And to your point, Alan, certainly a lot of times they'll come from a different background where, things are not as easy, if you will. But it seems as though as I've gotten older, a lot of athletes are more comfortable taking dipping a toe into that realm. And so I think that's what, a lot of them are doing now. Kind of the, see something, say something, if you will. So they're seeing things. The only pushback that I think they might get is that, if somebody like a LeBron or somebody else is talking about the plight of people who are disadvantaged and whatnot, sometimes people will look at them and say, hey, well, yes, you came from it, but you're not experiencing that now. And B, Pat, to your point, that can also backfire. Because how many times did you hear, President Trump talking about kneeling sons of bitches and LeBron?
Oh, yeah.
And, whatever.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a double-edged sword. You can use it to highlight the plight or elevate the cause, if you will, but that also can cut another way, too.
I was just, that was my point. I think it certainly helps in certain communities, but, this idea that it's always going to go back to people that live in the sticks and people that live in the city. It's just as simple as that. It's rural versus urban. And I think in places where athletes spoke out in urban areas where maybe voters hadn't turned out. And I think the NBA did a really good job of opening their facilities. I know a lot of the owners were big on that. And yes, Dennis, there was a clear agenda. I saw all those ads you saw, and I was like, yeah, they're basically saying, yes, get out and vote, but don't vote for crusty-ass Donald Trump. They didn't say that, but yeah, that's what I got out of it. I mean, so anyway.
And as a side,
Go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, as a side, I would just be curious to see, with the NBA owners opening up those arenas, I'd be interested to see, or I don't even know if the NFL did something similar, but I'd be interested to see some data on how much did that help, or did it hurt? I mean, I would just be curious to see from a numbers perspective. Yeah, you can have everybody voting at the Atlanta Hawks arena, but how many of those people did they go there because they didn't have a place to vote, or they didn't want to stand in line for 4 hours, or like I would just be interested to see whether that helped or if it didn't help at all.
Well, that's
I
one
would
of the
too.
dynamics that I think when we talk about the athlete impact in this whole voting election is I found the dynamic of a bunch of millionaires asking some billionaires to open up the places that they work to allow people to vote that in a manner that would be against the interest of the owner. Because overwhelmingly the owners of these teams are Republican. And in my estimation, not knowing any of these people at all, they're Republican because of the financial benefit that comes with Republican. They may be liberal on social issues, but if you're a billionaire and you're telling me that I can get my arena financed with public money and I don't use my own, that's attractive to me. So I found that dynamic of conservative owners opening up arenas to allow people to vote against their best interests. And we're getting athletes to promote coming to the arena. I found that dynamic interesting.
Well, and Dennis, I think that speaks to the machinations behind the scenes where similar to, and I'm not poo-pooing any of these movements when I say this. You guys, the three of you know what's in my heart. Our potential listeners may not. They can make assumptions as they will. Let's not kid ourselves. They have found a way to monetize this as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I think that feeds into that willingness. I can't think off the top. I've never spent any mind share on what the Warriors owners got out of opening that arena. Now they also financed their arena privately, which doesn't happen a whole lot, but I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about what they got out of doing that. But I think we know what Nike has gotten out of being behind this social movement. So,
it didn't take long, did it, for him to go to Nike, did it, guys? Come on.
No.
We're about 30 minutes in, so I feel like
Patrick, I can be in your driveway in 10 minutes.
I know.
I would have taken the under and lost, so that's but yeah, that's.
But to your point, Alan. You are correct. I think that I do think that that people got into it for the right reason, but there are probably some other people who saw it and was like, hey, well, if I can make a buck, in on the road to getting this guy out of office, I guess essentially, then I think there are people who definitely took advantage of that for sure.
Well, and two, even if it's not the completely cold-hearted world that I think it is. I mean, let's pick on the Warriors for a minute. And I'm sorry if me pouring the beverage in the background makes noise, but that's just the reality that we live in.
No, you should live your best life.
Hashtag COVID. Hashtag 2020, man.
The Warriors just moved from Oakland to San Francisco. There were probably not very many better public relations statements that they could have made in opening that arena up for people to vote.
Yeah.
Well, in that state, for sure. I mean, for sure. Absolutely.
So
what else about the Warriors, Alan? Tell us about the No, don't tell us about the Warriors.
No, this could spin into is the dynasty over? But I don't know what Dennis's outline says.
No.
I don't either.
I actually read the notes, Dennis. I read the notes.
Yeah,
so
you know what's coming. Thank you. So sort of switching.
He was late, but he read the notes. I love that. That's my guy. Go ahead.
So sort of switching gears here, because of college football and its chaos in terms of who's playing, are you not playing, who's starting, who's not starting, because the whole thing's been turned upside down by COVID. I feel like the one constant in the fall so far has been the NFL. So I'm curious. Give me some thoughts. What's your take? We're about halfway through the season. Sort of give me your takeaways from what you've seen so far, either good or bad. Surprises, good or bad. Like, what's sort of your takeaway? What stands out to you from this year's NFL season? Because I will tell you right now, I, as a Giants fan, knew my team was not going to be good. And it was brutal in the beginning, but I'll be damned if the Fighting Joe Judges aren't out here scrapping and clawing away to respectability. And the fact that he fired his O-line coach this week because he wasn't about the team. Like, at this point, this team, I'm cool with what's going on with New York, even though we're going to have a top 10 pick and be bad this year. But I'm curious, what's your takeaway? Brian, I want you to go last because you're in the best position, so I want you to go last. But just tell me what
he's got to go last. I'll go first because I'll probably take my pee break when Brian starts talking about the freaking undefeated Steelers. But so I'll keep with the fan slant that you set us off with, Dennis. The Bills are 7-3, and that includes a 2-1 record against what is likely the best conference in football, the NFC West. And that one loss took a miraculous play from, and this is my primary takeaway so far in this season, a miraculous play from DeAndre Hopkins, who looks like is making a leap right in front of our faces, like top 4 receiver of all time. Based on what we've seen him do and the fact that now he goes to a different team. I mean, he's still got he's got a good quarterback. I'm not saying he doesn't. But the plays that guy can make, I mean, a lot of receiving numbers are very inflated in this era. But watching DeAndre Hopkins just for a few games here and there, it's clear that he is a top tier player of all time at that position. In my opinion, that's been my biggest takeaway of the season, is his elevation, the pleasant surprise of the Bills and Josh Allen being a decent quarterback with a pretty good deep ball. And you know, that Steelers record is daunting, but God bless America. It's hard not to think of the Chiefs as the class of the league still.
DeAndre Hopkins reminds me, to me, he's like he's automatic. If I throw it in his direction, he's gonna catch it. That's the sort of be all end all. I do think you put something on Josh Allen because Buffalo has been trying to replace Jim Kelly since like 1998 or whatever.
Tell me about it.
And
yeah,
they actually, and I was skeptical about him. But he has shown in now this third year to have taken a leap. He can run, he can throw. They gave him a reliable receiver, a true number one. And with New England taking a step back, them in Miami, and I thought about this today, it really reminds me, now that Tua is playing well, reminds me of all of those late 80s, early 90s battles where it was Marino and Jim Kelly. And it was like, it was must-see TV, 1 o'clock on NBC. I'm showing my age here. But when those guys got together, that was must-see TV, those two guys going at it. And I think Miami and Buffalo are really on the verge of that. But, Pat, what do you think? What's your takeaway so far?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess the Jets were shitty in the 80s and 90s, and they still are shitty. The Patriots are floundering. Yeah, the Patriots are floundering. You know, I'm a guy that doesn't have a real NFL team. My fantasy football team is what drives my interest in the league. I like watching players, much like the NBA fans. They like watching guys and teams. I'm in the same boat. I kind of like watching the Chiefs. I kind of like watching, if I could find the Bills, I'd watch them, but you know, they don't put that on here. We get to sit through Baker Mayfield looking like a shithead. You know, he's not very good at quarterback. Luckily, they're able to run the ball a little. And then you mentioned your Giants. I mean, I just had to look up the record because I just couldn't fucking believe it. The Eagles are leading the division right now with 3 wins,
Do not get me started.
5 losses, and one. They have 1 draw or a tie. They have a tie.
But do you know who?
So they're 3-5-1.
Do you know who the tie was against?
I don't. I'd have to look it up.
The tie was against a winless Cincinnati Bengals. They were at home and they had a chance to win the game, and the Eagles played the tie. Keep in mind, Cincinnati's got a rookie quarterback, and they played for the tie.
I tell you what, for the good bulk of my, younger life, the NFC East was so fucking good. You know, the Eagles, Giants, Redskins, now Washington football team, whatever we're calling them, and Cowboys. That was the best division every year. The best, of the NFC. It's just kind of sad, I think, is what I guess my overall feeling for that division, considering all the great players that used to play in those teams in back in the day. But,
well,
I guess
I'll add to that though. I'll add to that. It is sad, but and this is the jackass in me. It's also a little inexcusable. If you can't put together talent in those markets, what are you doing?
Well, and Washington's been bad for years, and they got an asshole for an owner.
In a salary cap league, there's other variables here, but if it's just off market, yeah, I would agree with that. I will tell you, as a fan of one of the teams in this tournament, I can tell you unequivocally that you don't ever have to worry about Washington as long as their owner is their owner. You do not have to worry about them. They never amount to anything. And I will tell you, they missed a wonderful opportunity. Instead of calling themselves the Washington football team, which is a terrible name, they just should have called themselves the Washington Football Club, and their name could have been Washington FC. And they just should have done that like every soccer team and every football team in Europe. Like, that's what they should have done. But that tells you the level of incompetence that this team operates under. So you don't ever have to worry about them. And so with that, since we're talking about all these negative things, we should probably talk about something positive. So with that, Brian Tubbs, the floor is yours.
Oh, man. Whew. Man, that was a long wait for me. But to hit on a couple of points, one, Alan, I do think that I would agree with you that we're watching somebody in terms of Hopkins who is going to be, I don't know if he'll be the greatest, but certainly he will be in that conversation. Also, too, I saw a tweet that Adam Schefter made that on Sunday, he said, how ironic is it that game, the Cardinals and the Bills came down to 2 guys who got traded in the offseason to those particular teams. Yeah. So like just you could be rewarded for being whatever to being aggressive. Yes, I would say certainly my Steelers 9-0. I know Colin Cowherd beats them up a lot because they don't play, because, they lose, historically they lose games that they shouldn't. But they don't make the schedule. The league makes it. You beat who's in front of you and you just move on to the next game. So, I am anticipating a loss here within the next couple of weeks. It seems as though they're playing at Jacksonville, so this seems like a game they should win, so this is probably the game they will lose. But as long as Roethlisberger's standing up top, or standing, upright, and he's not injured, they got a shot. Kansas City is the only one that really concerns me, because I feel like people are slowly figuring out Baltimore.
Yes.
And New England, although with a Belichick team, I wouldn't count them out. Tua's a great.
You can count them out.
You're gonna mark that box. You're gonna check.
Yeah, go ahead and put that one down. This is a lost year for them.
And Dennis, I will say the Fighting Joe Judges you can be bad, but as long as you show that you're getting better, like I think there's something to that. When I lived in Arizona, they had the Cardinals had Steve Wilkes for a year. And so, like, they started off halfway decent, and then as the season went on, they kind of just started declining. And then it became obvious, like, not only does he have to go, Rosen has to go. And then that's how you get the Kingsbury, Murray era. But yeah, I will take my 9-0 Steelers. We'll just keep going, and we'll just keep plowing through.
Yeah,
Kyler Murray can play too, can he? Whew.
Yes, he's my fantasy football starting quarterback. So God. I love me some. And to that point, he's my starting quarterback, and I have him throwing it to Hopkins. So they're both on my team.
He is the definition of quick and fast. Like normally you have to shoot, but he's lightning in a bottle. Yeah, this season's been pretty interesting. I will say, for as good as the Steelers are, and all kudos to them for being undefeated. Honest to God, it's the Chiefs' title to lose. I just feel like at the end of the day, if like Buffalo tried to put them in a phone booth on a Thursday night and they won. If you want to get into like Carolina really went toe to toe with them 2 weeks ago, and they just couldn't hang with them. Like, I just feel like at the end of the day, you just don't have the horses to stay with them, and all they need is their defense to be like somewhere between 16 and 20 in the league. Their defense is just decent. I just don't see what you're supposed to do, because if you blitz them, you can't afford to leave those guys one-on-one. And if you don't blitz them and play zone, dude's going to pick you apart. Like, I just don't know what the answer is for that. And I'm not here to say that he's going to be the best receiver or the best quarterback of all time. But when it's all said and done, he may put all of the records out of reach to the point where it doesn't really matter. It's not even really a conversation.
Yeah, Dennis, I won't prolong this. I know you probably want to move on, but you were talking earlier about the Jim Kelly Bills, and the Chiefs remind me of them a lot, where, it was pretty clear with the way the Bills defense attacked the ball that they basically had the mindset of, all we got to do is get one stop or one turnover, and you can't beat us. And now there was a recipe for that with the O.J. Anderson Giants back then,
yes.
But that recipe doesn't exist in today's NFL.
No, nobody's running the ball like 60 times.
Right. But the Chiefs remind me so much of that old team, where they're just like, we're going to keep coming, and eventually we're going to get that turnover, and then we're going to be up 2 scores.
Yeah, and then the damn break.
I would also like to add that, we just talked about Kyler Murray, and you're talking about Kansas City. It's got Patrick Mahomes, but, those two dudes could have played baseball.
Yeah.
Pat Mahomes' dad was I think he pitched in the league for 10 or 15 years, somewhere in there.
He pitched for both the Twins and the Mets, Brian Tubbs.
Woo. Yes, well, and we can get we can talk about the Twins, how they haven't won a playoff game in like 20 years. But.
But I'm saying that accuracy, being able to throw a little tiny ball, I think it helps these guys somehow. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying here. I told you.
I agree. Like Russell Wilson was a baseball player, and I think it just goes to show.
Oh yeah, he was. Yeah, he absolutely was. Yep.
Like I just think it goes to show, like, if your kid is super athletic, let them play everything, because all of those skills are going to translate into whatever the one sport that they settle on. But let me ask you guys this, because yesterday was the NBA draft, and the draft universally was kind of looked at as this is a down draft. I don't know. History will tell. I will tell you the worst draft that I've ever seen, if you go back and look at it, is the draft where Kenyon Martin went number 1. And it's not that Kenyon Martin was a bad player. Kenyon Martin was a very good player for a long time. In fact, he's like my favorite, one of my favorite dunkers, just because of the way he attacked the rim. But, that draft had a lot of, like Marcus Fizer, it had a lot of bust in it. I'm trying to think, what was the one guy's name from Iowa State that I can't remember? He was a tall dude. Oh, Cato. You guys remember Cato?
Oh, Calvin Cato.
Yeah, Calvin Cato. Yeah, like just bust everywhere. I'm curious what you guys thought about the draft, especially against the backdrop of the news breaking that Klay Thompson blew his Achilles out like an hour before the draft. Because for me, once that happened, it was kind of like, I don't know that I even really want to watch this. I was just sick for Klay. I'm not a Golden State fan. I'm just a fan of good basketball. And knowing that he missed all year, this was setting up where the Lakers won, but the Knicks had made moves, and Denver had clearly gotten better, and Dallas had clearly gotten better, and Houston had taken a step back, and Oklahoma City wasn't going to make the playoffs. I thought it was wide open for Golden State to really make a run, especially with Wiseman playing the 5, and they're just asking him to rim run and block shots. And then Klay gets hurt. So tell me your impressions of the draft and kind of what you think where the teams go from here.
Alan, do you want to get another drink and a box of tissues to dry your tears for the Klay Thompson?
I'm not going to lie. I thought Ayla was going to cry. And for potential listeners, that's my 10-year-old daughter. I thought she was going to cry when I told her the Klay news. She had we were watching the draft before we went to basketball practice, and a lot of the language was going on around a week of Christmas start. It's like, oh, I can't wait to watch the Warriors and Steph and Klay. And do you think we'll be able to? Do you think they'll actually play games where a few people can go and all this stuff? Yeah, so it's not great. It's a bummer for me. He's I obviously, the Warriors and the Knicks. I've wanted a Warriors-Knicks finals my entire life.
That's very specific.
Yes. Yeah, well, they're my two favorite franchises. In my humble opinion, the two most passionate, educated basketball franchises. The Indiana's in the conversation, so I'll try to transition to the draft here since I already started talking, because it sucks that Klay's hurt. Even the most vicious of Warriors haters, 90% of whom live in the state that we reside in, most of them still like Klay. And a lot of people like him because of his personality, which is great, but he's also a great two-way guy. He's kind of like Joe Dumars on steroids, right? Where, he can really defend, does so many great things, and just kind of an interesting cat. I liked the Wiseman pick. I liked the rumored, I haven't been on Twitter recently, it was most recently still rumored, the Kelly Oubre trade to get under, that fits into the trade exception from Andre Iguodala. I think Oubre is at least a start. I think they're going to try to do that anyways, even before.
Oubre can play, man, and I think I think if that happens, that'll be a nice pickup for him.
Honestly, I was shocked that they let him go because, like I said, living out there, the Suns love Oubre. Like, they were really amped when they got him, and the fact they let him go, I was like, I was just shocked that they let him go.
That guy's 19 points
Yeah.
a game. So to me, like,
Yeah, 19 and almost 7 rebounds too. So I mean, he's not.
like he's serious.
He's not.
And he's developed because he was not that when he first came into the league. And so
Is he 6'5" or 6'6" too? He's not like a true big guy, like big forward. He plays.
he's a small forward. So
Yeah.
you know, to me, I think they'll be okay, but I don't think that's the move that's going to allow them to push the Lakers. Because
No.
if they made that move and Clay was healthy, and I'm bringing Oubre off the bench, all of a sudden this is a very different conversation.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's just a very different conversation.
And Oubre looks pretty silly now in those hype videos debuting their city jerseys now. For
Yeah.
sure.
I heard he was the one that was repping "We're the Boys from the Valley," and they took it and like put it on the court and made these jerseys, and now he's gone.
Yeah, he's walking a horse in Gilbert. Like, hey man, like I don't know. I just feel bad for him. But anyway, I digress.
But so I'll wrap up some draft thoughts. I do like the Wiseman pick for the Warriors. In past conversations, you guys have talked about, with DeAndre Ayton and a couple of these other guys. I think these big athletic guys are going to start punishing these teams that really bought all in on small. And so I like the Wiseman pick. I'm not sure how I feel about Patrick Williams in Chicago from Florida State, but I saw a great Twitter follow is Rashad Phillips. He played at Detroit Mercy, and he really knows the game. And he had a tweet today that made me think about, hey, it's time we put some respect on Florida State and Leonard Hamilton's name and the types, the consistent winning. And he's consistently putting NBA players into the league, so that's worth a mention. Brian, for you and I love the Obi Toppin pick by the Knicks. He said he's not a big ceiling guy, but he is NBA ready right now, and I think that's.
He can score in this league for sure.
Yeah. Regardless of how I feel about Kyrie Irving and his mental state. One of my favorite players all year was that Sadiq Bey from Villanova. I think they may have traded that pick to the Pistons, though. I haven't figured that out.
There were so many trades last night. I could not, I don't know who's going who where.
I just Googled it. Yes, Sadiq Bey did get traded to Detroit.
Okay.
So the Nets did pick him at 19.
Guys, I've often said I'm much too old to still have hate for sports teams, but the Pistons are up there. And then I loved the whole Malice at the Palace thing. It was just like, yeah.
Oh, 16th anniversary today.
Yeah. But
I
I love the RJ Hampton pick for the Bucks. Those guys who play overseas against grown men for a year or two, that makes a difference. So those are two of my thoughts.
Is Hampton Australian, or did he just play in Australia? Is that what it was? Which one was it?
He just played there.
Okay, so he's not Ben Simmons, where he's an Australian dude playing. Okay.
He skipped a year in college and decided to go play overseas rather than go.
I can't say I blame him for that. I mean, I don't even watch college basketball anymore. I don't know who half these fuckers are. I know Obi Toppin because I have to. I live in Ohio.
Pat, I'm kind of like you. I'm watching this and I don't really know who these guys are, and I felt a certain type of way because I used to know every guy in the draft, and now I don't know anybody in the draft. It felt like I know Obi.
Well,
and I agree with you, Alan, that I think you're going to have to start looking at Florida State a little differently because if I think back, Florida State makes the tournament. They seem to be a Sweet 16 team every year with guys you don't know. Leonard Hamilton coached in the league, so he knows what NBA players look like. And he gets them to come to Tallahassee, and they sort of fly under the radar. Yeah, they don't beat Duke, and yeah, they don't beat Carolina, but you look up, they got 26 wins, and they make the Sweet 16, which I think in major college basketball, that's really what you want, is a team that's going to make
that's a successful season.
Because at that point, that gives me enough cracks at it to be able to make a run. So The other thing that kind of stood out to me in a sense of irony was LaMelo Ball goes to Charlotte. And so now his loudmouth dad, we'll see how loud he is. Or at least his dad's not loud now. He used to be, but he's not anymore. But we'll see how loud he is.
I'm putting money down right now to watch that on pay-per-view. Right now, what does it cost to get that on pay-per-view? $50, I'm down.
To watch Jordan play.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, I'll put my money down right now to watch Jordan at almost 60 years old dust Lamar Ball.
Oh, he'll dust his ass. It's not even.
I would be remiss if, based on some earlier comments, if I didn't point out that Kenyon Martin Jr. was drafted last year.
Yes, he was.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
he was, wasn't he?
Second round.
Don't say stuff like that, Alan. God damn it. I'll just say this. I don't know half these dudes in the draft. The only guys that I know for sure that are probably going to be good is that dude from Georgia because he can score. And I think that'll translate. What's his name? Edwards?
Yeah, but you got to watch him. He said he doesn't really like basketball. Basketball's cool, but he likes football better.
Yeah. Well, listen, they start signing his checks. He's gonna get. Yeah.
Wait till he gets
the Timberwolves are gonna pay. Yeah, the Timberwolves are paying him money. He'll be all right. He'll be fine. But I think. Listen, the NBA and Alan and I have had this conversation for years. Who knows who the fuck is good based on what they did in college? Like, you won't know. We won't know who's really good or not, especially lately because these guys don't hang around for a couple of years so you can get an idea what they got.
Well, I think
so.
Well,
you don't know who these dudes are.
What I always like to say is, what the thing that doesn't help is the current prevailing style of play and the way the college game is officiated. And that's what leads me to, you guys have heard me say before, that nothing will skew the view of an NBA prospect's talent than watching them play modern college basketball. Because, you've got teams playing zone, you've got guys body checking everywhere, reaching in, hacking. You've got coaches that are still trying to run like the type of 3-around-2 motion offense running through a post that they were running in 1970.
Well, shit. Dennis named this goddamn podcast after the Carolina Tar Heels, didn't he? And the Four Corners wasn't that Dean Smith?
That's Dean Smith.
I was thinking that too. Like when he named that, I was like, why do I know that? And it just hit me. I was like, that's Dean Smith. Motherfucker, how dare you do that? What are you doing? I'm just looking at the list because I had to Google it. Did you see that Dick Cheney got a draft pick in this draft? There's a dude listen, the Kings took Tyrese Halliburton. Dick Cheney's company. Come on, guys. Dick Cheney runs Halliburton. Now he's got a fucking player in the league. Yeah.
I want you to look at two things. I need you to look up Tyrese Halliburton's suit from last night.
All right. Google it. Looking at it now.
It is Willie Cauley-Stein level floral pastel. Like that meme where he was sitting there and they put the flower thing behind him. Imagine that as an entire suit. There's that.
Oh, wait a minute, guys. Hold on. Wait a minute. I look at the picture and immediately my mind goes to Boomerang. Hey, Gerard.
Yes.
Gerard, you know your dad's got a mushroom belt? Listen, look at that shit.
I had that same thought too.
Gerard, your dad's got a mushroom belt. He's like, oh damn, that's something else right there, man.
The second thing I want you to look up is Zeke Najee, N-N-A-G-I. Look up Zeke Najee's mom and see what she did last night. Listen, I saw it and I texted Brian. I text Brian and I said, "What in the Rachel Dolezal is going on with this woman?" And it was.
Oh, wait a minute.
While he's looking that up, I'll throw out there that I saw some Sacramento folks today too calling.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alan.
They're calling the De'Aaron Fox Halliburton backcourt. They're calling it the Iraq War backcourt.
The Iraq.
That's a reach I was not ready for.
Well, you didn't expect somebody to come up with Halliburton on this podcast, Dennis? Come on, man. Look who you invited here.
I did not see that.
That didn't come to your mind? Hey, by the way, Zeke's mom has got, if anybody's going to listen to this, go Google this shit. She's got something else I've never seen. It almost matches the painting behind her. If you look at this picture, there's an eagle flying. It's got all the same colors in her dress. Like, that shit is on purpose.
You know what? I sent Dennis a pic. I sent Dennis a pic. The first thing I thought, as soon as he saw that to me, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's I'm gonna get you, Sasha." You know, with the.
Does he have a fake leg and butt?
No.
No, the militant dude.
Where they go into like the Black Liberation Office and they offer them bean pies and bean juice.
Bean pies and stuff. Yeah, that scene. God, we could talk about that movie. Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole nother
Oh,
thing.
you're not kidding.
That's a classic.
Just the Chris Rock scene is a whole podcast.
Oh.
If you can look up Zeke Najee's mom and the kente cloth.
Oh, I'm looking at it.
She had on, man,
I'm looking at it.
I spit my drink out like, what in the Rachel Dolezal is going on around here?
Yeah, well, that's a great call out because it does look like she might teach Afrocentric studies at Arizona State or some shit. Like, where the fuck ever she's at.
Oh, man.
I mean, look, and again, if you see the picture behind her, it's an eagle flying or a hawk or some shit, and it looks just like the same patterns in the dress, like almost like I'm gonna coordinate with the whole room. Again, coordinate.
Mushroom belt.
He said, Gerard, I can watch that right now. That's so good. I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
How dare you guys make me look that up?
Do not hold back your laughter when you do.
I had to mute my phone because I couldn't even believe it. I'm like, I get this. Wait, she's supporting. Listen, let's not be crass. She's supporting her son somehow.
Yeah, I think it's like her stepson. I think it's like a
right,
like a second marriage or something like that. Yeah, but sure, for sure,
absolutely.
No. Listen, I want to.
I don't.
In moments like this is where Twitter is irreplaceable.
It's undefeated.
People were comparing her on Twitter to Russell Wilson's first wife when he got drafted.
Oh shit! The one he divorced when he was like, "I got some money now."
Right, the one he divorced. So there's two more things I want to cover before we get out of here. There's something that jumped out to me last weekend, and with college football on Saturday and all the big games going on, I'm just absolutely floored at the collapse of Penn State and Michigan. I'm just absolutely floored. Specifically Penn State, because I feel like Michigan has slowly been taking a step backwards ever since Ohio State beat them in overtime on the controversial 4th and 1 that they didn't get. I feel like Michigan is consistently taking a step back and Ohio State is taking a step forward. But Penn State being 0-4, I'm just confused by that. Like I don't know what to say.
Go ahead, Al. Go ahead.
Well, and to your point, Dennis, it's like, I mean, I get the rivalry conversations dominate college sports, and that's fine, rightfully so. But it's one thing to not be able to beat the football factory that dominates your conference. When, like you were talking about earlier, when they've got all 4 or 5 stars and you don't, you're going to get beat. Ohio State puts 20 guys into the league every season. Michigan probably puts 5, and Penn State probably puts 8. But what starts to be jarring is when they're losing to other people. Michigan got their freaking asses handed to them by Wisconsin. And that's the type of team that usually, so here's my brief take on the Big Ten, and you guys know how I feel about the Big Ten football conference. A lot of the schools will put NFL players into the league in the trenches. Iowa will give you some offensive, defensive linemen, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Michigan, Penn State, whomever. The big separation comes in the playmakers. Because Ohio State's better offensive and defensive linemen too, and they've got NFL players at wide receiver. And running back to a degree, but I feel like wide receiver is usually the bigger difference maker when you're watching the games. And so those things are going to happen. I think what jumps out at me is when you watch Michigan and you don't see guys who can separate. Like you don't see a player where they can get the ball in space and separate that into a big play. And even Penn State, they've had as close to success against Ohio State as anybody has. Took a couple miraculous plays here and there that were probably influenced by those crowds that aren't there currently. They don't put a ton. They've had a couple that Allen, what's his name, that receiver, I think they put in the league.
Allen Robinson, I think.
Yeah, Robinson. Yeah, they don't put the conference in general doesn't put a ton of skill position guys into the league outside of Ohio State. So they're always going to get beat by them. So that's fine. But when they start getting beat by these other teams is a concern. And what makes me curious, I think James Franklin has some space to play with. I think that Cincinnati's success this season creates an interesting dynamic with if Luke Fickell would be, tempted by a Michigan or Penn State job, more so Michigan. But I think that what the thing that makes it interesting is I always call out Tennessee as my example. Tennessee got tired of Phil Fulmer and his 9-3, 8-4 seasons, and they fired him, and now they're getting their asses kicked every week.
That's a great parallel to Michigan.
And I think that there is a lot of fear in some of these schools that they rely on donor money, but they're not spending $40 million a year on their football program necessarily like Clemson is, or Ohio State or Alabama, that they're not getting the traction on national recruits. I think they're in a tough spot where they're like, well, who are we really going to get? Are we going to just be 5-5 every year? And so all of that aside, it is a talent thing. I mean, like I said, I married into a Michigan family, and so I watched them a lot. And I remember seeing Michigan people tweeting about Devin Funchess, and I remember getting into arguments with with some Michigan fans about, you really think Devin Funchess is a difference maker? Oh yeah, he's going to be this in the NFL. I'm like, no, if he was that good, they would get him the ball 12 times a game, and they're not. So he's not that good. So the talent has been on decline for a while up there. I don't know if people finally just like, why the hell would we live up here? Or, these players just, play in warmer areas or what, but it's jarring. And the Penn State one, Dennis, I agree with you, is more jarring to me because it felt like they were still kind of riding out that storm. That they got Franklin, and if I were a recruit and Clemson wanted me and UC, Southern Cal wanted me and Penn State wanted me, I would go to one of the warm weather places first. But it seemed like Penn State was riding that out and was going to still be good, but definitely a struggle there. So it's weird, and it's weird seeing them getting beat by the teams they're getting beat by. And by
I knew
much.
Penn State was in trouble when Maryland blew them out at home. That's when I knew they were in trouble, because Maryland shouldn't be able to show up and beat you up like that. I'm sorry.
Well, especially
that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, much like my comments earlier, there's no greater advantage in college football than a playmaking quarterback, and especially a quarterback that can complete some passes downfield. I won't insult him by butchering his name, but to his brother, he's a playmaker. And I think that Penn State has had enough of a fall off in other spots that Maryland just having that playmaker at the quarterback spot was enough for Penn State to get run off that field. That was jarring. I don't think anybody expected that.
I saw something the other day.
Well, Dennis, go ahead.
You have to be able to, college football, if you want to win, you need a quarterback and you got to be able to score 40 points a game. That's the game now. If you don't have a quarterback, if you can't score 40 points a game, you have no shot. So Penn State doesn't have that. So I think, and neither does Michigan for that matter. And I think that's just where we're at.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, I was just going to say this was the one segment that I actually brushed up on. I took a look at Penn State, and I'm not so sure that what you're seeing in Penn State just isn't kind of what happens up there in Penn State or over there. I guess, where am I? I mean, look, I looked at their record. I had this saved. Joe Pa, listen to these records. This is starting in 2000. Okay. So 99, they were 10-3, 2000, 5-7, next year, 5-6, 9-4, 3-9, 4-7. That takes us up to 2005 when they were 11-1. And then obviously the Paterno had a couple of good years there, 11-2s. And then the whole, nonsense with the stuff that went down there. And then you got Franklin coming in his first couple of years. He was 7-6. So to me, I just see a pattern. And I look at it like, well, maybe this is just a down year. And down years are possible in a place like Penn State because it's in their history, right? This isn't a 10 or 11 win team every year. This is a team that has peaks and valleys, whereas you don't see that with Alabama over the last. And happy valleys, yes, Alan, thank you. But my point is, like, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not that worried. If I'm James Franklin, I'm like, listen, it's a bad year. He'll probably keep his job. COVID sucks. I'm sure he'll somehow, I don't know how many games they're playing. Are they playing 8 games? If he could somehow finish at 500, I don't know what the college football looks like, but I wouldn't be too worried about them. Michigan's another story altogether. I think, Alan touched on it, but, Michigan's just, they don't spend enough.
So
period. And Ohio State.
Harbaugh's got 1 year left on his deal after this year. So does it make sense?
I heard they're not extending it. I heard they're not going to extend it.
So then you've killed your recruiting.
Yeah.
And I guess
if you're not going to extend it,
and Brian, this is the conversation we have all the time. If you're going to get rid of Harbaugh, who are you going to get?
That's better.
That's better than him. Because honestly, like, you know, the article I read the other day was they're saying Michigan absolutely has to call Lou Fickell and make him say no. I have a hard time seeing Lou Fickell go to Michigan. I just can't see it.
Well, there are a couple things that I read too that said that there's only his, and I could be wrong, because, you know, a source close to, like, you know, you can take that with a grain of salt. But supposedly the only 3 jobs that he is interested in to leave Cincinnati is Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Penn State. So if you're not one of those 3, now maybe you could talk him into Pitt if Pitt fires their coach. But, I mean, he's sitting undefeated right now and potentially could get a, you know, New Year's Six bowl, right?
Is Pitt a better job than Cincinnati right now? I mean, he's already.
Oh, no?
No, he's established himself there. So
yeah. So what? But to your point about Michigan and recruiting, I had during this past signing period, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I wish I did, but it was something ridiculous to the point where if you take all the 5-star recruits that signed within the Big Ten and you added them all up, that is like equal to the amount of 5-star players that Ohio State has on its roster.
Yeah. I mean that's where we're at.
Good night, folks.
Yeah. So listen, this is the classic Larry Bird 3-point contest. You all of you are playing for second place here, right? So it's a recruiting thing. Harbaugh, when you're not good at your specialty, like he's good at quarterbacks, right? Like that's his calling card, right? Like that's what he does. He's good at offense. And when your offense isn't good, like that's a problem. I mean, that's a real problem. And then when you face a team like Ohio State that's got all these horses, you know, these past couple Ohio State Michigan games, like it's not even close. Like it's just not even close. So, you know, if you can't recruit and you're not good at the thing that you're supposed to be good at, like that's a recipe for disaster. In terms of Penn State, I kind of want to give them a mulligan because there are a lot of teams that are not doing well this year. And part of that may be COVID, I guess, but I feel like there's more. I would be more optimistic about Penn State. I kind of agree with you, Pat. Maybe this is kind of just a cycle. This is kind of a one-off year. But typically, outside of when Franklin first started, like that guy's given you 9-3, 10-2 every year, with one of those losses being to Ohio State, right? So the question you have to ask yourself is 10-2 good enough? And because, you know, as Ohio State fans living here, you had the John Cooper era where it was like 7-5, 8-4, maybe a 9-3. They get rid of him.
Mostly 9-3.
Yeah. So then
9-3 was Earl Bruce. 9-3 was Earl Bruce. Yeah.
But then wait a second though. John Cooper had plenty of years where his only loss was like Wisconsin 1 year, Michigan State 1 year, and Michigan.
Yeah, John Cooper's last. I'm looking at it right now. His last few years, he was 11-1, 10-3, 11-1, 11-2, 10-1-1. The year they famously tied Michigan, where what's his name? Gordon Gee called it our greatest victory ever against Michigan. That's back when Michigan kicked our ass all the time.
But that's why he got fired, because you can't go 2-10-1 against your rival. Gene Stallings in that Roll Tide War Eagle documentary, he said you can lose to Auburn, but you just can't lose to Auburn every year. Otherwise, you won't be coaching, right? Like, so you can lose to Michigan. You're not going to win everyone, but you can't lose to them every year. But Tressel elevates it and goes to 10-2. Or I'm saying that, excuse me. He goes to
Tressel's 9-1.
Yeah. Well, he goes 9-1 against Michigan. He's giving you consistently 10-2 every year, right? But then eventually you hit that ceiling where you're not like they get one championship, they play for 2 more, and they get kind of blown the doors off, right? So then you bring in Urban, and Urban does nothing but give you 12-win seasons. You get a national championship out of it, and then Dave just kind of keeps it rolling. Like, I don't see that trajectory for Michigan at all. Like, at all.
Not at all. No.
So, and to your point, Alan, about like I love your comparison about Philip Fulmer, because Michigan fans got tired of Lloyd Carr giving them 10-2 every year, playing in either the Citrus Bowl or they get a Rose Bowl or something like that. And they're like, no. We should be higher. My understanding is they have Michigan as a program has like the amount of 12-win seasons that they have as a program is the amount that Ohio State had last decade, or like the past 10 years or something ungodly.
They definitely have an altered reality. They've got one national championship in 4 generations or something. So the analogy I'll give, and then I'll shut up on the topic. But what was funny for me was I was talking to fortunately or unfortunately, most sports fans are much more casual than we are, right? So or they're focused on one team and casual on everything else. But I remember talking to a Michigan fan, and the Appalachian State game came up, and that person's comment was, "Yeah, that goddamn Rich Rodriguez," and I said, "Whoa!" I said that was a Lloyd Carr team that ended up 9-3 and beat Florida in a bowl game.
Yeah, they lost
that wasn't
Oregon too.
Yeah.
But I was like, just check yourself a little bit here. They went 9-3 that season. That was Mike Hart. They were good. They got beat that day, but they beat Florida in a freaking bowl game. Which, let's say, Big Ten teams need to circle it when they beat an SEC team in a bowl game.
Agreed.
But I just found it funny that the way the human mind works is they started to assign, they assigned that loss to Rich Rodriguez, even though it didn't happen.
Well, here's something to think about. Think about this. So Michigan is the equivalent of the Cleveland Browns in terms of their football program, and here's why. Because they won a national title. What was it, 98? Was that 97? 97?
They split with Nebraska.
Okay. So they won the late 90s. Then they start the playoff or whatever. They haven't been in it. They've never been in it. They've never played in, I guess, the de facto college Super Bowl, if you will. So they're the Cleveland Browns of college football. They were once great.
I'll take you one step further. They haven't even played in the Big Ten championship yet.
No, they have not. Yeah, that's right. So, they're basically the people that remember Michigan being good are people our age. So I'm 43. I was 49 or 50, I think. And Dennis is probably 39. I don't know. These guys are old. We're all older. We grew up in Central Ohio. So we remember when they used to hand us our ass all the time in football. This doesn't happen anymore. It's done. The Michigan is done.
Well, the
effectively done.
The thing I'll add to that is that a lot of the Michigan folklore, and frankly, until this recent era, when Urban came and apparently this guy can sell fucking snowshoes to a goddamn penguin. A lot of the folklore around the Big Ten was around Big Ten championships.
Yes.
They would always conveniently ignore getting their ass kicked by USC or UCLA in the Rose Bowl, but they were focusing on Michigan won the Big Ten championship. They won the Big Ten championship. And that probably went for Ohio State a little bit too. The focus was on the Big Ten championship.
I think it's generational too. It's always about winning the Big Ten and going to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
That don't mean shit anymore. It really doesn't. But
no,
you date yourself when you talk about the college football like that. It's just not that kind of game anymore. It's boiled down to 5 or 6, really 4 programs every year that have a puncher's chance, and one of them is 90% Alabama, and then throw Clemson in and Ohio State, and then whoever that 4th team is.
Well, you've got your top 3 that are your regular rotation, and then Georgia, LSU, and Florida.
Oklahoma.
And occasionally Oklahoma, yeah.
Yeah, and Oklahoma, especially with the power. That Southwest, they've got a lot of power in like votes and stuff, which you see in like Heisman voting and sports MVP voting, but that's another conversation. But it's really those squads. I mean, that's it.
It's wild. It's wild to think about.
And I mean, and I think that the difference between the conferences is, Penn State can do their thing here and there. I think the SEC has a few more teams that can occasionally get that playmaker where they might knock somebody off, or have a magical season or something. But for the most part, you've got Alabama, OSU, and Clemson. Oklahoma representing the Southwest, and then sometimes Georgia, LSU fit into the mix, and then Florida's always kind of right there, but they usually have one loss that keeps them out of whatever. Sorry, I'm right.
Yeah, man. Yeah, sorry, Dennis. We talked a lot about
we went long on
the
that
college
subject.
football. Yes.
That's why you're here. I think we're talking about programs that have all this history and tradition, and to see them sort of hit a different level, one that's not really successful, is a bit shocking to the system. I'll say as a kid growing up in the John Cooper 2-14-1 era, every time we play Michigan, I get nervous every time we play them, even though if I'm being honest, the game that scares me more is Penn State. And so to see them both fall off, it's like, come on, like I need you guys to be good so that way when we play, it elevates the resume and whatnot. But I know it's getting late, so one last thing I want to cover. This came up in the news the other day, and I thought you guys would be perfect to talk to about this. This is sort of in your wheelhouse. So the Baseball Hall of Fame ballot came out the other day, and when I looked at the ballot, I said to myself, based on what I'm seeing, and I'm going to show my bias here, so full disclosure, Barry Bonds is my favorite player growing up. And in my mind, if Griffey takes steroids, he's Bonds, and if Bonds doesn't take steroids, he's Griffey. And when I look at this list and I see who's on there, all of these guys in my mind are borderline Hall of Famers. There's no slam dunks here. So when I think about Bonds and Clemens, if these guys don't get in now, especially when we're talking about baseball writers who turned a blind eye to steroids and then came back and said, no, you can't get in because you took steroids. The hypocrisy just drives me nuts. But I thought you guys would be good to talk about or talk with, based on this Hall of Fame ballot, who do you guys think is a Hall of Fame baseball player based on who's eligible?
Patrick?
Alan, you go first.
Hang on a second. I somehow brought up the wrong visual here for the conversation. So,
well, I'll tell you. I'll go.
You go.
I'm not a baseball guy. I used to be. My full disclosure, my favorite team growing up was the Minnesota Twins, because my favorite player all time is Kirby Puckett, pre-woman beating, because he was a short, husky guy playing center field, and I was a short, husky kid. So, that being said, but as it, time has kind of gone on, I've kind of worn off. And like I said, they haven't won a playoff game in 20 years, which is really weird. But, to your point, Dennis, it seems as though, I can't remember what the baseball writer was, but they were talking about the steroid era. And they made the comment that either you should let all of them in or you should let none of them in, because there is some complicity. Writers are complicit in terms of turning a blind eye. Baseball is complicit in some instances, turning a blind eye. So I don't, even if you take the steroids away, Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. Steroids or no steroids, Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. So I feel like he should be in. If you wanted to tell me that Clemens, you want to keep him out. I guess you can keep him out, but I feel like he's got the numbers, at least from what I know. It seems like he has the numbers that he should be in. And then I'm open to discussion on anybody else, but I do feel like those guys should definitively be in.
And to be clear, some of the guys that were on the ballot this year were guys like Gary Sheffield or Andrew Jones or Kurt Schilling. And those are all great baseball players, and I'm not saying that they're worthy of consideration because I think they are. But those guys aren't slam dunk. Like, it's not like Derek Jeter or Rivera or, one of these guys.
So,
it's without a doubt.
Well, just to clarify for anybody listening, some of those guys have been on the ballot for a while, right? So, like, Schilling, Clemens, Bonds, they've all been on for a while. I think the new additions were I think it was Torrey Hunter was one of them that we talked about.
Yes.
In texting, and some of the pitchers from like the early 2000s, like Tim Hudson, Barry Zito, the guys that pitched for the A's, those guys were all new to the ballot. So as far as like the new guys that are on the ballot, and I'm Googling it now, just so I can see it. Tim Hudson, Mark Burley, Torrey Hunter, Dan Herron, Barry Zito, Aramis Ramirez, Shane Victorino, AJ Burnett, LaTroy Hawkins, Michael Kadire. Those are all first-year ballot guys that are eligible, and none of those guys, with the exception of possibly Torrey Hunter, are
Damn right.
Hall of Famers, in my opinion. But so now we're talking about guys like Sheffield, this is his 7th year on the ballot, Schilling his 9th year, Clemens 9th year, Bonds 9th year. So yeah, I guess if you're gonna listen, the Hall of Fame is I'm a fan of it. I love it. I love going there. It's fun. I'm a baseball guy. So I do think that you have to figure out a way to somehow immortalize the careers of Bonds and Clemens and these guys that are on the list, right? So eventually they're going to have to get in. And I don't know if it's – go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it sounds like almost what you're saying is if there was ever a year to put them in based on who they have on the ballot now, it would be this year.
Well, I'm kind of saying that listen, the baseball writers, and Alan will tell you this even more than I can because he has great examples, but baseball writers are assholes for the most part, and it's a dirty little guild of shitty small guys that never played sports, right? That just are really good at writing and like to tell stories, blah, 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 blah.
There's a long history with baseball writers of real fucked up MVP voting. There's a long history of casting Hall of Fame. I don't want him to be unanimous. It's annoying.
It's annoying. It's yeah.
And you add to that the more you read and learn and watch, and some of those things that we've always used as kind of our benchmarks for Hall of Fame in any sport, like MVPs, but then you see people who are elected to them. You're like, well, that was a bad vote. So do MVPs really matter to me? So it's a complex thing. I will go ahead and kick off real quick just because I'm not shy. Dennis, I'm right there with you. I know for a fact, and people could throw statistics at me all day, and they could throw syringes at me all day. I know for a fact the two greatest baseball players I've watched in person are Ken Griffey Jr. and Barry Bonds. When I had the Major League Baseball package, I would be flipping around games, and I would get timing So like I would be watching the Mets, say, or the Twins, but I would take note of where the Giants were in their game so that I could flip to when I thought Barry Bonds was going to be hitting again. The home run he hit off Troy Percival just landed in my front yard yesterday.
Is that the one from the World Series?
Yeah, it's the one for the World Series.
That's the furthest.
Yeah.
That's the furthest baseball I've ever seen hit in my life, ever.
That's what he said. Those were his words. Or that was Tim Salmon, or one of those guys said that.
Joe Morgan broke down his swing one night on a Sunday night and showed him relaxing his shoulders and deciding not to swing when the pitch was a third of the way to the plate, whereas with every other player that Morgan examined, they did the same thing when the pitch was 2/3 of the way to the plate. So regardless of what people try to say, he was a special hitter. He only got about 4 pitches to hit per game, and he didn't fucking miss. So
let me add to that, too, because I remember a segment where Peter Gammons did a thing about Bonds. It was like 2000, 2001, where he was in spring training covering the Giants, and he was telling a story about how Barry was working with his dad, Bobby, and Bobby was throwing balls to him, like, in front of him, like, in a spot. And he would only swing if it was in this one spot. So he basically trained himself, which is why he drew a lot of walks, because he really only knew that he could do something with it in this little zone. And then you think about, the greatest people that ever figured out how to do hitting really well. Ted Williams is on the list. Tony Gwynn is on that list. Kirby Puckett, to a certain extent, Brian is on that list. He figured this out, right? So he had this other thing, and yeah, he bulked up and his neck got big and his head got big. Sure, all of that's true, but he was still the best baseball player that I ever saw play in person.
The thing that put it over the top for me was the Greg Maddux thing that circulated recently, where Maddux was like, somebody asked him about Barry Bonds, and he goes, actually, he was the easiest hitter I ever pitched to, because if it was an important situation, I just walked with it.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. My favorite Bonds story is Buck Showalter for the Diamondbacks walks Bonds. The bases are loaded, and he walks Bonds and gives up the run intentionally. Like, I'm not pitching to you with the bases loaded. I'll give up the run before I pitch to you.
Yeah. But so what it's worth, so full disclosure, I'm going to adopt these, even though I usually like to be a little bit more clear, I'm going to adopt the same asshole approach that baseball writers usually adopt when they're voting for these things. I'm not going to vote for Roger Clemens because I don't like him. He threw a broken bat at a Mets player in a World Series game.
You got to get over that.
I won't.
He's not going to get over it. He's been bitching about that for 20 years.
Well, especially when, and Patrick can attest to this, long before everything came out, I was telling everybody, I knew I've always known who the steroid users in baseball were. You know, when a guy has 3 straight, 10-7 seasons, and then he's suddenly going 25-4 every year, I've got a pretty good idea of who the steroid users are. But not that I even care, because how do we define performance enhancement? I mean, I know plenty of people who need a cup of coffee to get going in the morning. That's performance enhancement. But I just don't like Clemens, so I'm not going to vote for him.
Well, I will say,
so I've got Barry Bonds.
Along that line, that's why if we're going with that logic that I can't vote for Kurt Schilling, because Kurt Schilling in the bloody sock and getting shot up with cortisone. Cortisone is a steroid. It's a performance enhancer, therefore he's disqualified in my mind. But that's another story for another day.
Right.
It's a terrible.
Alan, I just looked it up on Baseball Reference. Clemens' last 3 seasons in Boston, and by the way, he was 31, 32, and 33. years of age. He was 9-7, 10-5, and 10-13. Okay. 97 goes to Toronto, wins 21 games. 98. 98.
Vitamins.
And he pitched 264 innings that year. 264 innings that year. And then in 98, he's 35. He goes 20-6. Wins the Cy Young at age 34 and 35 after basically having 3 years of normal decline we would see for a power pitcher like Clemens was, right? So
I think aside from just not liking him, I think the big difference for me is that Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer before he did it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he was a Hall of Famer before. Set the steroids aside. Like, if you look at his numbers pre-steroids, he's already in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something real quick because I got it in front of me. His first year, if you guys remember, if you're old enough to remember Candlestick Park, where they played baseball in San Francisco for a long time.
Where home runs to die.
Okay, so his first year in San Francisco in '93, he hit 46 home runs and drove in 123 runs.
Yeah.
It was the MVP that year. His back-to-back MVPs.
I'm surprised they didn't try to give it to Jeff Kent again.
He wasn't there yet.
But yeah. So I've got Barry. I'm leaving off Roger Clemens just because I'm exercising my right to be a dick. I've got. I'll check off Todd Helton. He was a great hitter. I've got Torrey Hunter because I don't assign the great defensive players get elected to Cooperstown just to the shortstop position. I think that can actually apply to other positions as well. Plus, he was just shy of 2,500 hits.
That guy was a Sports Center highlight. Like, in the summertime.
Fuck yeah, he was.
That guy was a Sports Center highlight. Torrey Hunter was good.
I've got Manny Ramirez. I've got some thinking to do on Scott Rowland. If Kurt Schilling wasn't such an asshole, I'd probably vote for him, but I got to leave that. Gary Sheffield's got the fastest bat through the strike zone I ever saw, so he's got my vote. I'm leaving Sosa alone just because he just had too big of a peak.
He's Haley's Comet.
He
showed up.
Well, he's the hitting version of Clemens, right? Where decent players started to decline, and all of a sudden something happened.
Yeah, I can remember the end of my freshman year in college. We would be in like stages, and we would make everybody stop and turn baseball on because McGuire or Sosa was coming up to bat. Like he
right.
Haley's Comet. Like, he just showed up out of nowhere, and for like 4 years hit 60 home runs, and it was like, okay, I guess.
And then, I'm not voting for Vizquel. Too much of the story of his success is longevity. But yeah, so those are mine. Sheffield, one of the great hitters. Hunter, just a great defensive player. Manny, just a great hitter. Helton, great hitter. And of course, Bonds, top 5 of all time.
Top 3.
Yeah.
I mean, really, when you look at, top 3.
I mean, you could make an argument.
But yeah,
you could make an argument that Bonds is the best baseball player alive. Like, I know they said
absolutely.
Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. As great as Willie Mays and Hank Aaron were, there's nothing like Bonds. There's just nothing like Bonds. Pittsburgh, San Francisco, there's just nothing like Bonds in my mind.
He walked 232 times in 2004. In the 2004 season, he drew 232 base on balls. There are teams in the Major League Baseball right now that the whole fucking team doesn't draw 232 walks in a fucking season.
I mean,
it's insane.
That he had that season or two where he literally got one ball to hit per game, and he still didn't fucking miss it.
Yeah, steroids or no steroids, there's a handful of people in the history of the planet that can do that.
So to me, I don't really think you can have a Hall of Fame without him. And I would honestly, I think it's long overdue. I think this would probably be the year. Sneak it in, call it COVID, sickness, or whatever. The voters finally came to their senses, whatever you want to call it. And they're just like, listen, we'll put him in. Everybody kind of knows this story. Does it really matter? Dude, does anybody even care about baseball anymore? It's another thing to think about.
Yeah, that too.
So
side note, does Rose ever get in? Because I feel like they're waiting for him to die to put him in.
Nah, they can't put him in. He signed an agreement.
Oh, he signed. Oh, okay. I forgot about the agreement. Okay, all right.
I mean,
he doomed himself with a piece of paper and thought he was going to be able to just use his presence to override it.
Well, not only.
And I think I think commissioners that have followed have used it as a point of reverence to Giamatti, because that shit killed Giamatti. I mean, there were obviously a lot of factors go in, but it didn't help. That shit contributed to killing that dude. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to reverse that.
I want to give you credit for this, Alan, because you've shaped my perspective on this 20-odd years ago. And, we were talking about Pete Rose, and you said, listen, and I'm going to do a lot of paraphrasing, and you said this. The reason why Pete can't go in is because you have a professional sport that is a competition. And if you allow someone that has compromised the integrity, whether you believe he bet on the Reds or against them or whatever, if you put something like that in, I think that you said something about it turns into the WWF now, right? Because the integrity's gone, then people don't know we're watching a competition. If you let one guy in and they say, oh, it's okay, then it's a slippery slope, right? So I've always felt that way since. I mean, Pete's a great baseball mind and a great baseball guy, but, he can argue all he wants. He signed the paper. There are a number of people that have gone on record and said that he was a fucking piece of shit as far as gambling. And yes, he bet against the fucking Reds. I believe that. And he had direct outcome, of those games. So
no reason
even early on, when the argument was, I never bet against my team, one of the things that I remember thinking was, well, you're still making a statement on the days that you don't bet on them. You know
sure.
What I mean?
Yeah.
He, great player, played hard as hell, dumbass, gambling problem. I have no opinion on it. Like, if somebody were to come out and have a declaration that, hey, Pete Rose is in the Hall of Fame now, they're like, oh, hey, there are some people in Cincinnati that are going to be happy. I don't care.
He's a Cincinnati dirtball, and if you know Cincinnati, like, if you really know Cincinnati, and I kind of do, he fits that Cincinnati dirtball profile. Like, that's just what he is at his heart and soul. And
I have heard
no, he's not. He doesn't belong in.
I've heard Cincinnati referred to in a lot of different ways. Dirtball is not one.
That's a new one.
Man.
Yeah, as a native Ohioan, I've never heard that.
It's a real sleazy place, man. Don't get it twisted. Cincinnati is not the Queen City anymore. It hasn't been for a long time.
Actually, you know what? Matter of fact, I just saw on the news, didn't they have like a city councilman who got arrested for bribery charges?
Listen, that happens all the time. I'm just saying, this is a bullshit town when you really look at it.
All I know is the Bengals are team that doesn't have an indoor practice facility. That's
Yeah, it's still right by the freeway. You drive right by it, and they shut the bridge down the other day because it caught on fire.
Come on, Cincinnati.
Not because of the Bengals being bad, but yeah.
All right. Well, with that, guys, I guess we'll wrap up. Any parting shots for you guys?
I'm just worried I probably made us go on too long.
Oh, don't worry about that. This was good. This was good. I think we ran.
No,
this
is just. Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, that is a stalling tactic, to the four corners. But for anyone listening, like this is basically like just a audio version of our text chain between the four of us.
Pretty much.
And pretty much any happy hour or any time that we've gotten together over drinks, like I remember one time we used to always banter about like who was the greatest this or that, and so I think Alan one time he created a list and we just all met at the Regal Beagle one time and we're like, okay, we're gonna figure this whole list, and we just sat there for hours. So like this is just the audio version of what we do in text messages every day.
And
pretty much.
We could do it at happy hours at some point.
And listen, chances are people aren't going to like it, and fuck them. We don't care.
With COVID, this is the new happy hour. No, so.
It is. You get together, you talk, you record it, and then you let people listen. They're trying to clean their cars out.
Given the amount of drinks that got made in the last hour and a half here, I would say this is the COVID happy hour.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I will do this again if you want me to. I don't think I added much. I certainly know I didn't actually, but I want to give Alan credit for not bringing up Nike and conspiracy theories. He needs his own fucking podcast for that shit. Like he can start his own for that. And maybe that's a spinoff. Maybe he and I start a podcast where I just sit there and go, man, you're full of shit the whole time. And he just spews stuff. And I just go, man, that's fucking bullshit. You really believe that, Alan? You go put your head on the pillow at night believing that shit? That would just be the whole podcast. You might listen to that.
You know what we would title it? We would title it Friends Like These, eh, Gary?
Yeah, Friends Like These, eh, Gary? This fucking guy. He's not a friend of mine. He's just some wacko I've met at Nationwide 20 years ago. I can't get rid of him. Yeah, I can't. What am I going to do? Anyway, thank you for having me.
Yes, this was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
My first and last podcast was great.
Oh, no, we're starting one. Yeah, we're starting one, Alan. You and I. We're going to sit. We're going to talk. It's going to be called baseball stats and other stuff. We're just going to go, hey, man, did you know this guy did this one year? And we're going to sit there and, like, cum in our pants. Like, oh, my God, this guy hit like that. Because we like that shit. Alan and I love baseball stats. You know what you guys should do? You guys should come to we should all go. We did a couple years ago. We'll go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. I know you guys aren't super big baseball fans, but it is fun. Just to look at some of these great players, and just the town is really charming. It's a great place. And Alan and I are going to go. We're members. We go we did go a couple years ago, but we buy our memberships every year is what I'm saying.
Speaking of that, the next time I have you guys on, we need to explore. This is a legitimate conspiracy theory, but there is a conspiracy theory that's been going around the internet that Babe Ruth was secretly black, and they let him pass because he was light skinned, and because he was so good.
I'll talk about that.
They could not afford to let him go to the Negro Leagues, so they let him pass as a white man, and he blew all the numbers out of the water, but secretly he was black the whole time, and they knew, and they just kept it a secret.
Yeah, there is a lot around that. It's a big reason why Ty Cobb hated him. Supposedly.
I've never heard that.
But I know that Patrick has read a lot more and watched a lot more on Babe Ruth than I have.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I read. Go ahead.
I only heard this rumor because there was another rumor going around that Mike Tirico believes he's Italian, that he's not black.
Well, listen, that might be true. We got to be careful with that one. That one might be true.
I heard that, and I heard that, and about did a double take when I first heard it, and started looking into it. And then someone else brought up, well, if you think that's crazy, then they brought up the Babe Ruth thing, which I had never heard of. So we'll have to save that for
Well,
another episode. But
so if anybody's listening or interested, Lee, I think his name is Lee Montvale. He wrote two biographies.
Good writer.
He's a great writer. He wrote two biographies. I read them both. One on Ted Williams, and the other one on Babe Ruth. And pretty early on in the Babe Ruth one, they talk about specifically what you just mentioned, that I don't necessarily think he was black, but they did call him N-word lips. That was what they called him. And he hated that so much. There's and Alan's calling it out. Ty Cobb hated his fucking guts and used to call him that. Like he wanted to fight people over it. And it kind of drove him to hit the fucking ball over the fence. But yeah, they did call him the N-word lips. That was his nickname back in the day. Not very nice at all, but that's what they called him.
Well, that was a different time. A different time. By the way, it's hard for me to.
Was it though, Dennis? Was it really that different, Dennis? It wasn't that different.
Listen,
there's been white assholes in this country since they landed here. Anyway, sorry, I'll get us way off the rails.
No, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that it's hard for me to take all those records pre-Jackie Robinson seriously. It's a segregated time, and you're telling me these records.
You can't.
I can't. The best baseball player that ever lived might be Josh Gibson, and no one knows about it. The best pitcher might be Satchel Paige, and no one knows about it. So it's hard for me to take baseball seriously when the whole thing was segregated from the beginning. Then Jackie Robinson shows up, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what is this? So it's just really hard for me to take anything prior to Jackie Robinson seriously. But we'll save that for another day. So with that, I want to thank my guests, Pat, Alan, and Brian, for coming on and running the four-corner offense to perfection. Dean Smith would be very proud of us.
I'm sure he would.
I think we effectively stalled the offense to the point to cement this win. So with that, I want to thank you guys for tuning in.